On Oilers.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Friday edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zavar, coming up on 1 year as the host of the show, and it has been quite the 12 months covering the Edmonton Oilers. I want to thank everyone that's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. To kick things off on today's show, we're going to discuss the Oilers' injury management as it pertains to Draisaitl and Trent, Frederick, who returned from injuries and then came back. We're going to pivot our conversation to the logjam in the lineup, especially down the left side. And we're going to tie a bow on today's show, talking about whether or not they have a goaltender controversy whenever Stuart Skinner is healthy, if Calvin Pickard deserves to remain the starter. So, at the outset, I personally find the hockey injury conversation to be one of the few remaining points of contention in discourse. There are certain avenues and certain threads that we have a consensus final answer on, that one side has definitively won the argument and the other side has moved on. They have taken to another interest or another vein of the game to defend or discuss. And there are two concrete schools of injury management in professional sports, and hockey is a little more nuanced and deeper than that. But you have the camp that would like to see players gut out injuries because that is deemed to be virtuous, that if you are willing to play through injury, you would do whatever it takes to win. And that is considered to be something of high character. You think about when you were a kid going to school, how the kids who had perfect or near perfect attendance were praised just for showing up, coming to school sick. And there's some nuance in there. Should you be going to school when you're sick? Should you be going to work when you're sick and you could get other people at your job sick? That is a point of contention. Of course, in sports, a torn ACL, a sprained ankle, those are not contagious ailments. If you try and play through a sprained ankle, you aren't going to give someone else a sprained ankle. It doesn't work like that. The other end of that injury conversation in the sports world, which is generally where I end up for the most part, you want to get a guy as healthy as they can possibly be. Now, certain injuries are going to need treatment. They're going to need corrective surgery. And in that case, you're never going to get close enough to where you want to be, where you would feel comfortable if you were a player. And that's slightly more nuanced. But in the case of Trent Frederick and of Draisaitl, it's very clear that both players are dealing with an injury that is prone to re-aggravation. And we know, based on logic and how sports work, when you injure something, if it is a reoccurring injury or a nagging injury that needs correction or needs physical therapy, and you are trying to cut some of those steps out, you are trying to gut out that injury, you are going to be prone to re-aggravating. And even worse, you're going to be prone to compromising other parts of your body. So, for example, we know Trent Frederick is dealing with an ankle injury. That's what he had when he was acquired from the Bruins. It's what Chris Knoblauch said. It kept him out of the game after that first shift against the Kings. Said he never really felt right. He played 7 total minutes in the game. Ultimately is going to end up missing some time here. But the Oilers knew he had a nagging lower body injury. And I would assume the conversation was Frederick telling the training staff he felt as good as he was going to feel, and he wanted to test it out. And some coaches are going to be a little more militant about no, get right. Some coaches are going to be a little bit more player friendly and say, if you think you can go, you can go. And I think that's probably ultimately what happened in both of these cases. And I am not casting blame on Chris Knoblauch here. I am trying to explain a complicated and nuanced position. I personally would always rather the guy sit one more game and try and get as right as he possibly can, as opposed to trying to gut out that injury, because if you re-aggravate it, you're not helping anyone. And then number two, on top of that, and this is a really sensitive subject that not a lot of people agree with me on, but I am going to say it. At a certain point, you playing injured becomes selfish. And you might say, well, Nick, if someone's willing to gut out an injury and try and play through compromise, wouldn't that tell you they're the opposite of selfish? They're doing whatever it would take for their team. In a vacuum, yes. The problem with that, and why I don't personally subscribe to that theory, if you're going out there physically compromised and you can't play up to your normal ability, not only are you going to be a diminished version of yourself, you're going to have an impact on your line mates and whatever defensemen happen to be out there while you're also out there. And that's going to put more stress on the guys around you to make up for you. And as you go along, you're going to have a harder time recovering game after game because you're starting at less than 100% to begin with. And the longer you go on as a physically compromised player, the harder it's going to be for you to eventually get right. And yeah, do hockey players have access to great medical treatment that the rest of us don't? Yes. Do they get otherworldly amounts of physical therapy and treatment between games? Yes, of course. They want to play. They're going to do whatever they can in their power to stay in the lineup as best they can. But at a certain point, it's not about the team when you're trying to play through a broken bone or a torn ligament. At that point, it's becoming a you thing. It's becoming an individual pride thing. And pride and hubris are an important part of the athlete's psyche. You need to believe you can do your job at an extremely high level to be a professional athlete. That mentality to be great, to be a professional athlete, is something that most people on the planet don't have for their normal lives, their normal day-to-day job, let alone the level of physical rigor associated with being a professional athlete. And this is not casting blame. This is not trying to construe what Draisaitl or Frederic did as something bad. I understand those guys want to play. They're hockey players. Hockey players want to play hockey. But at a certain point, as a team, as a medical staff, as a coaching staff, you got to protect that guy from himself, because that guy is not always going to be of the most rational state of mind. And as a decision maker, as a medical professional, you have an obligation to put those guys in the best possible position to succeed. And it's hard to do that when we're talking about someone coming off of an injury. It's hard to do that when we're talking about somebody who's playing at less than 100%. The hope is Draisaitl and Frederic will both be able to return before the start of the playoffs. That said, these are valuable games those two guys would be very helpful for. And if you brought them back just one game too soon, they could have gotten a little more treatment. And of course, this is hindsight. Hindsight is 2020. I don't have all the answers. I'm not a medical doctor, to quote Jack Hughes. I am not a doctor, but I think he's going to play. And when it comes to the greats, and I haven't mentioned McDavid, I haven't mentioned Stuart Skinner, I haven't mentioned Mattias Ekholm as far as important contributors who are out right now, you're going to assume they're going to try and come back sooner rather than later. And we'll talk more about Skinner specifically in our third and final segment of today's show. But coming up next, we are going to talk about the logjam in the forward group, what it means for guys like Mattias Janmark, Jeff Skinner, Trent Frederic, Evander Kane, Max Jones, Vasily Podkolzin, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Because right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking a heavy favorite or riding with an underdog. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many different ways to bet on your favorite individual player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a big
chance to win. Don't miss out. Head on over to fanduel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today.
Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. And in pivoting towards lineup questions, I think the Oilers have a good problem. There is never a problem with having too many options. Maybe when it comes to getting something for getting something because you have too many options, that's a real problem. That is a tremendously fortunate problem to have. There are a lot of teams who don't have 12 forwards and don't have 6 defensemen they feel particularly good about. In the Oilers' case, they have 8 defensemen. They have 14 forwards, 15 forwards if you want to include Derek Ryan, who we'll talk about at one point during this upcoming segment. But as we sit here right now, the assumption is the Oilers are going to go McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent-Hopkins, Henrique as their 4 centers when the playoffs start. So what does that do as far as the rest of the lineup? Number one, if Nuge is playing down the middle, that means Connor McDavid needs a left wing. The assumption is one of Jeff Skinner or Evander Kane is going to ride there. Next, if we get to Leon's line, you assume they're going to visit something along the lines of Podkolzin because of the success they have had together throughout the course of this season. Or should Trent Frederic be healthy, I could see a world where Trent Frederic, who has some top 6 bona fides, can score 20 goals over the course of a full season. I could see him riding on Draisaitl's wing as a more high-end version of what Vasily Podkolzin is on a temporary basis. And if that doesn't work, they go back to Podkolzin in that spot. So what does that do further down the lineup? Well, it means you have Jeff Skinner, it means you have Podkolzin, and it means you have Mattias Janmark as your 3 remaining left wings. Now, if it is Kane, Frederic as the 1-2 on the left, you're going to assume it's going to come down to Podkolzin or Jeff Skinner. Personally, and I say that because we know Chris Knoblauch really likes Mattias Janmark on the penalty kill, and frankly, we know he likes him out there in end-of-game situations when the Oilers are trying to protect the lead. Chris Knoblauch feels very comfortable having Mattias Janmark out there on the ice. And yes, I'm well aware he only has 2 goals on the season. I am well aware he really rode a crazy shooting bender in the playoffs last year, especially on the penalty kill, the amount of shorthanded goals Connor Brown and Janmark were able to chip in on the penalty kill last year throughout the course of the postseason. But knowing how Knoblauch feels about Janmark, that likely means the 4th line spot is out. And that leaves us with a very strict binary. Do we want Podkolzin or do we want Jeff Skinner? Now, if Nuge is playing Nuge is playing first line left wing with McDavid and Hyman, that opens up a door, because then maybe Frederic's playing center, which he has experience doing. Henrique might be bumped up, and then Max Jones has to go in as that 4th line center, or Derek Ryan has to go in as that 4th line center. The Oilers have options. And while there may be some decision paralysis here as far as making a definitive decision, when you're in the playoffs, you don't have to have continuity. Continuity generally helps. Lineups that stay the same, that don't get injured, generally fare better in the postseason. But if you want to juggle based on mismatches, based on your matchup, what team you're playing, based on the way the games are going, the flow of the game, that's a great luxury to have. And I point to that Montreal Canadiens team a couple years ago that went to the Stanley Cup final, that was rotating 2 or 3 guys throughout their lineup based on the game situation in the series, based on who the opponent was, where someone like Jake Evans was rotating in, someone like a Yoel Armia was rotating in. And I don't know if we will ever truly see baseball style lineup management in hockey, where you see matchup dependent players and guys who are basically platoons, where depending on the matchup, one guy plays versus the other. Because frankly, most teams don't have 12 guys they feel rock solid about, and generally feel comfortable rotating 12, 13, 14 forwards relatively interchangeably. But right now, if I had to pick my personal choice, I would still, and I'm really thinking about this because if you come down to the nitty gritty, if you really want to decide based on what generally works, you want to have as much goal scoring in your lineup as possible. As much as defense matters, as much as being defensively responsible matters, you need to score more goals than the other team. And Jeff Skinner is the best of that group, of that cohort in terms of creating offense. He has been healthy, unlike Evander, Kane, or Trent Frederic. He has shown you the ability to help create some offense, especially over the last months. While the Oilers at large have been struggling, Skinner's been reasonably good as far as his goal impacts, as far as creating offense in terms of driving offense. And there is no right answer here because we are talking about something in the speculative realm. We don't know what this lineup is going to look like when it's entirely put together because it hasn't played together. Evander Kane hasn't played hockey since last June. Trent Frederic has played 7 minutes as an Oiler. What are those guys going to look like when it comes time to fill out a lineup card in a week and change when the playoffs start? Because if you're playing the Kings, you might opt to play a Vasily Podkolzin over a Jeff Skinner against LA because LA is a big, plotting defensive team that doesn't give you a lot through the middle of the ice. And you think Podkolzin would be more useful to have on the forecheck. And in your mind, you're picturing, well, if we can roll out Kane, Frederic, Podkolzin, Janmark down the left side, that's 4 guys who should be pretty effective on the forecheck, putting pressure on the other team's defense, about making those guys uncomfortable and forcing them to work harder defensively on a team that by and large this year has had issues as far as forechecking consistently, creating off of the cycle. And the Oilers by necessity have become a cycle team because they just don't have the foot speed they've had in years past. You lose a Fogle, you lose a Holloway, you lose a Ryan McLeod. That is a lot of raw foot speed. And to compensate for that, the Oilers have had to play more dump and chase, and it has forced them to be a less efficient offense. And the reason I say less efficient is because they're still in the top 5 of most of the metrics in terms of scoring chances, expected goals, high danger chances. The problem is they're not scoring as regularly, which is telling you that they have a ton of volume, but they're not very efficient with their offense, and they have to work harder to create offense. And that's not where you want to be if you're a Stanley Cup contender. You want to have your bread and butter plays. You know, you think about a football team to start the game, they come out with a game script. They have 10 to 15 plays pre-programmed in to just get their quarterback in a rhythm, to see what the defense is giving them so they have information for later when it comes time to call the game a bit more instinctively and habitually. And in hockey, you want to get to your game. You want to make the other team uncomfortable. You want to try and control the flow of the game. And the Oilers lineup question likely will linger as long as the playoffs go on. With so little set in stone, there is ample opportunity here for someone to seize a great role on this team. And if you're a hungry guy, if you're someone on the periphery who doesn't think they're a lock for the playoff lineup on a nightly basis, this is your chance. No Draisaitl, no McDavid, no Ekholm, no Skinner, no Klingberg. Go out there and play your way into a spot. So that way, when you play the Kings in a week and a half, or you play the Golden Knights, you're wearing your uniform instead of a suit, eating popcorn up in a luxury box. But that'll do it for our second segment. And speaking of injuries and injury management and lineup decisions, do the Oilers have a goalie controversy brewing between Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner? More after this quick break on today's edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day.
There's nothing like the energy of a live game. Whether it's getting to a baseball game, an NBA playoff game, a concert, a comedy show, the theater, but finding great seats at a great price, that used to be a pain. Now we have Game Time. Game Time makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever. Prices actually drop as the event gets closer, and with their all-in pricing, you see the total cost up front, no surprises at checkout. The last-minute deals where you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. You can grab last-minute seats to any game and save big with their zone deals. And the biggest thing for me is the peace of mind that Game Time gives me. There's the seat view in the app where you can see the view from your seat before you buy. There are no surprise fees at checkout, and the lowest price guarantee means you can book with total confidence. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Are lingering regular season questions. McDavid's missed 13 games this year. Ekholm has missed 13 games this year. Draisaitl is missing his 6th game against the Ducks and likely will miss the game against the Blues on Wednesday as well. The Oilers have real question marks about the management of their injuries. They have questions about who's going to play when everyone's fully healthy. And part of that conversation about when guys are fully healthy and who's going to play, how can you possibly feel good if you're Chris Knoblauch about Stuart Skinner getting maybe 3 regular season games down the back stretch here to ramp himself back up mentally and physically to being a playoff starter? And look, even more than last segment, there is no right answer here. Calvin Pickard has played in 3 career NHL playoff games. He has started 2. He has won 1. He has lost 1. He came in relief in the 3rd one. All 3 of those games were last year in the 2nd round against the Vancouver Canucks. Personally, as crazy as it sounds, in spite of the fact that Pickard has better numbers than Stuart Skinner, I feel obligated to say the Oilers have a higher ceiling with Stuart Skinner in net than they do with Calvin Pickard. Now, I think the Oilers arguably have a higher floor with Calvin Pickard, and that really comes down to how you feel about the Oilers team at large. If you feel like all the Oilers need is average NHL goaltending, and Pickard has been an above average NHL goaltender in terms of save percentage, and that's not saying a lot. NHL save percentage average this year is .894. Pickard is at .901. We are not talking about a significant improvement over league average, but it is still over league average. And you compare that to what Stuart Skinner's been, where it's been low quality, it has been below average, and by and large, the Oilers have banked on the idea that all Skinner needed to do was work out of whatever funk he was in, and the game would come back to him. He would find a way. He would make something happen, kind of in the same vein that the Oilers gave him the net back at the end of the Vancouver series, and he played really well in the Dallas series, and he was fine to good against the Panthers in the Cup final. The Oilers don't need a Shesterkin, a Vasilevsky, a Hellebuck caliber goaltender for this team to be successful. Would it help? Of course. Any team would take elite goaltending if you can get it. The problem is, and the everydayers have heard me say this all the time this season, there aren't enough good goalies to go around. So most teams are pretty happy if they can get one of the average goalies. I know there are people watching this or listening to this that would rather roll the dice with Pickard. And I understand. I think that's a reasonable position. I think the problem with that mindset is layered. There's 2 components that I think I disagree and why I would not do the same. Number 1, Skinner has shown you on occasion the ability to play at a pretty high level in a difficult environment. Last year in the Stanley Cup final and the conference final against Ottinger and Bobrovsky. Those are really good goalies. And Skinner played well enough that he was not the problem in either series. 2, and I said this in the opposite manner a few weeks ago, and that might be hypocritical, but I want to explore this thought a little. If you want to go back to Skinner next year, with last year he's a free. Last year he is under team control next season. How do you build him back up and tell him, yeah, we trust you, when you just benched him for a guy with 3 career playoff games who basically has never been a consistent NHL starter? Yeah, was Pickard a starter for the Avalanche like 5 to 10 years ago? He was for 2 seasons. The second time, The team won 20-something games the whole season. They were a lottery team. That was the Cale Makar year, last time Pickard had been a full-time starter before this past season. I think and this is really difficult because I was going to say, I think you dance with what got you here, but at the same time, you don't want to buy into the sunk cost fallacy. You don't want to be worried about next season when you have this season, the one you're currently in. And that's really the binary you have to deal with. Do you want to roll with the supposition that based on track records, based on previous performances, you're more likely to get what you need out of Skinner? Or do you think you're more likely to get what you need out of Pickard? I don't have a definitive answer. I would lean towards getting Skinner back in there. But for the people out there watching and listening who are saying, well, Nick, wouldn't you rather ride the hot goalie? And that's why I've been so hesitant to be so authoritative in this conversation, because I don't feel particularly great about either goalie. I don't think either guy is capable of elevating a team. I don't think either guy is capable of being a difference maker in the positive. Could they be a difference maker in the negative? Yes, definitely. I think both guys could absolutely become a problem at some point if they played poorly to that degree. Lest we forget, Stuart Skinner has been pulled in 2 consecutive postseasons for Jack Campbell and then last year for Calvin Pickard. So the Oilers have work to do here. It is really important that they are able to get Stuart Skinner back so he can get a couple of regular season games in under his belt before the playoffs start. Because very frankly and very straight up, if you are asking a goalie to come in cold and be good off rip against a good team that has home ice advantage, that is a really difficult circumstance. Now, you're a professional athlete. You're supposed to be able to perform regardless of the circumstances. He's also human. He is also a reality. It is also unrealistic to expect them to lock into that degree. And can they do it? Yeah. I think Stuart Skinner is capable of turning in good performances in the playoffs. We have evidence. But if you feel particularly strongly about Pickard or Skinner, I think you're letting your emotions guide you a little bit too much. And there's nothing wrong with that. You're a fan. Fan is short for fanatic. I commend you for having strong convictions. I just don't feel particularly great about either guy. That will do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts or over on YouTube. Thank you so much for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go check out Locked On NHL, covering the biggest stories from across the league with the local expertise of Locked On. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.